Good morning, gentlemen. Are you able to hear me today?
Good morning, sir. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Wish you all a very good morning. We will start our boiler class today. And last time we left off at hot wells. Okay. And the next topic to be taken up was last time hot wells. And the next topic is normally on our kind of ships, on a kind of cargo ships where we do not have main propulsion by steam turbine. Mostly on our kind of ships, the main propulsion is by normal IC engine. So, since we do not have main propulsion by steam turbine, we do not come across this deaerators. But you never know. On some ship, it could be fitted. So, anyways, since the studying it this morning and it is part of your course, okay, let's look at what it is. The basic purpose of a deaerator is to remove any dissolved oxygen or any other gases. Basically, any dissolved air, oxygen, any other gases which may be there in your feed water heater, in your feed water. And how do we remove this? By heating up the feed water. Now, where is this deaerator heater fitted? It is fitted somewhere between the condenser, where the steam that is returning back. I think somebody's mic is on. Right. Let's continue. It is fitted somewhere between the condenser and the hot well, or the cascade tank. It is cooling down the steam. It is condensing the steam, which is returning from the turbine. And in the process of condensation, there could be some gases which have got dissolved in the condensate. Steam being vapor, we do not expect that any gases are dissolved in the vapor. That is, and since that is at saturation temperature or above, so the gases will not get dissolved in the steam. But once it condenses, we could have the surrounding air getting dissolved in the condensate. And as we have already seen that dissolved gases, especially oxygen and to a large extent carbon dioxide, that is not good for the boiler. It'll start having some corrosion and erosion in the steel casing of the boiler, steel casing, the pipes, etc., etc. So there, in these kind of ships, we fit a deaerator. So what does the deaerator do? The it's the removal of oxygen is obviously necessary. Deaerator, primary reason to fit a deaerator is removal of oxygen, and that is necessary to prevent tube fitting and other problems due to oxygen attack on a boiler. And the small amount of oxygen that still remains after the deaerator still remains in the condensate and by chemicals for which we are doing boiler feed water treatment. For example, your hydrazine hydrate. There is another kind of treatment in which there is a thin, if you once we add that chemical, a thin protective layer is coated. A thin that chemical coats the insides of the boiler with a thin protective layer, and this thin protective layer does not affect the heat transfer. And most of the time, use this hydrazine only. This thin protective layer we don't we do not use it. And this deaerator, it also acts as a feed water preheater. So that means once the steam has condensed, and it'll condense due to this fact that the seawater temperature is less than the saturation temperature of the steam of the steam. So the steam may the condensate of the condensate may go down substantially below 100 degrees centigrade. Now, if we put this cold condensate back into the boiler, that means first the boiler has to raise up the temperature to 100 degrees centigrade and beyond before it starts evaporating and again becomes steam. So what we do is to prevent all that happening, prevent all that waste of energy. We have a preheating, deaerating, come preheating of the condensate. And other gases is removed when the air is heated up. Okay, let's go to the text. Air containing oxygen and other gases is removed when the air is heated up to the saturation temperature, boiling point corresponding to the pressure. And gases, they cannot remain in solution in the feed water at this temperature. So that's the whole idea. Oxygen or any other gases which are harmful for the boiler, for example, carbon dioxide, the water to its saturation temperature, that is its boiling point, all the gases which are there in solution, they boil out. That is the bubbling that we see when any water is heated up to its boiling point. And then here what we do is breaking up the water into a fine spray. So this feed water which is coming in, that is broken up into a fine spray. And the reason being that same reason as earlier we have studied, like we studied for the burners, etc. The fuel is broken up into a very fine spray. The fuel is atomized, etc. Here also the feed water condensate, it is broken up into fine spray so that its surface area is improved. And then from a small steam tapping which is coming from the turbine, the heat from the steam is given to this feed water. So that this feed water temperature, and it increases very rapidly due to the fact that it is broken up into a very fine spray. The surface area is greatly improved, etc., etc. And the heat is transferred from this incoming steam. The steam requirement here is not much. It is just to heat up the feed water. So normally this steam is taken from any of the steam lines which is going to the turbine, and then as a result the feed water is heated up. And then once the feed water is heated up, any dissolved gases which are there, that is vent line, there may be a small fan fitted in the vent line, and all the gases are exhausted from there. And the water which is collecting at the bottom, it can either go directly to the feed pumps or it can go to the hot well. Like I said, this is normally fitted between the condenser and the hot well. So the water can also go to the hot well, because your feed pump suction, that is normally at the last chamber in the hot well. If we go back, your your condensate is coming in from your condenser. It goes past these baffle plates, then it goes past these filters, which are to to filter out any oil from your heating coils, your storage tank heating coils or cargo tank heating coils. If the coils are leaking and there is any oil ingress, and that oil will get trapped here. And then finally it goes first chamber, second chamber, third chamber, last chamber, suction for your feed pump. This N, that is your feed pump suction. This one is a drain, and then you have your hot well overflow. This is a kind of float for filling up the hot well. This is your thermometer for checking the hot well temperature. So the hot well temperature should be as close to 100 degrees centigrade as possible. Obviously, since the hot well is at atmospheric pressure, because you can see this vent here and this overflow pipe over here, that means the hot well is not pressurized. Since it is at atmospheric, condensate in the hot well is also at 100 degrees centigrade. So we should try to maintain the temperature here as close to 100 degrees centigrade as possible, so that any air, gases, carbon dioxide, etc., cannot dissolve in the feed water. Because once that dissolved gases, oxygen, carbon dioxide, that goes into the boiler, that obviously, as we have seen, that is not good for the boiler. So any oil that is coming in, that has to go through before it finally reaches the feed pump suction. So for any oil that is coming in, for it to reach the feed pump suction, firstly the hot well has to be empty, practically empty for the oil to reach here. Oil will normally tend to always float at the top of the hot well, at the top of the water, and since it floats, if it tries to go past this filter, it will get trapped at this filter. So we are supposed to skim off any floating oil in this chamber. We are supposed to skim off any floating oil that we see. There normally is an observation port, or there could be a oil in water probe also. We had talked about this in the last class. So the possibility of the oil reaching this feed pump suction is pretty remote. Like I said, the hot well has to be pretty empty unless the hot well is full of oil, in which case we are already in a pretty bad situation. But that is almost never the case in traces. And the traces during the watchkeeping with the observation glass over here, the watchkeeper, since he is keeping a watch, he will be able to spot it. And in case he does not spot it, and in case there is a probe, oil and water probe fitted over here, the probe will give off an alarm. So this the deaerator, it is fitted between the condenser and the hot well. That means on this line. Sorry, where did we go? On this line A. So the deaerator heats up the water. The condenser has already cooled down the steam. The condenser temperature may be pretty much below 100 degrees centigrade. And then before the condensate comes to the hot well, the deaerator which is fitted somewhere here, that heats up the water so that the feed water in the hot well also remains as close to 100 degrees centigrade as possible. And the total surface area when many small particles is greater than the surface area of a few large particles. We note that from our studies of the boiler burner, the atomization of the fuel in the boiler burner. As the surface area in contact with the steam increases, so does the rate of heat transfer. So that means it is quickly brought up to the temperature of the quickly transferred to the condensate particles, since that they are into very small particles. Smaller particles require less heat to bring them to boiling point as opposed to larger particles. Very true. And this type of heater has the dual action of removing air which has been absorbed into the condensate as well as heating up the feed water. And figure 16.34 illustrates. Go back. This is here 16.34 that illustrates a deaerator head equipped with multiple nozzles. So you have your water sprayers, multiple nozzles all around the top of the deaerator, through which the feed water is being sprayed. And the sprayed feed water, it comes into direct contact with the heating steam, which comes out from here, and then due to this arrangement, it spreads all over the all over the top of the deaerator. Being hot, it rises. Both of them meet. The heat from the steam is transferred to the water, and any other gases, the water heats up, and any gases which is there in the condensate, that is vented out from here. And air, excuse me, air and other incondensable gases which are released are drawn off by a small fan in this vent line, and which is at the top of the not just the water which is being heated up, it's also the gases which is dissolved in the water that is also getting heated up. And as you know, any hot gas, that will tend to rise. So that's why they fitted the vent line at the top. And it's got a small fan to assist in the venting. And air and any other incondensable gases are released, which are released from the condensate, are drawn off by this small fan. And the cascade trays, these are your cascade trays over here, that helps to break the water. The deaerator operates at a steam with a steam pressure slightly above atmospheric to prevent any possibility of air coming in. And the feed temperature at the outlet is the saturation temperature corresponding to this pressure. So it will be marginally above atmospheric pressure so that air from outside cannot come in. The deaerator head is normally fitted to a feed storage tank as shown. Here it is shown that it is going directly to the feed pumps or the water which is collecting over here, going directly to the feed pump, but normally your hot well. The suction to the boiler feed pump connects to this tank. So it either drains to the hot well or it drains to the feed water tank. I don't think the idea of draining this to the feed water tank is advisable, because in the feed water tank, again, the water is just stored. The temperature will drop and the air can again dissolve back into again recontaminate this condensate, again redissolve back in this condensate. So it should be going back to the hot well. And the heating steam is bled from the turbine. There's small piping, and that steam is the one that comes and heats up the condensate. When the deaerator is operated at a temperature corresponding to saturation temperature of the incoming steam, it is a few degrees higher than 100 degrees. So why is it a few degrees? It needs to be a few degrees higher than 100 degrees because boiling point at atmospheric pressure is 100, and here we are maintaining the pressure at marginally above 100. So correspondingly, the boiling point of the water will also increase marginally above 100. And some of the dissolved solids, now there could be some solids. Normally in steam, there should not be any solids, but in case some solids are coming from your heating coils, from your turbines, etc., some scale has got dislodged, etc., that has come and that has got dissolved in the condensate. Even though the concentration of these dissolved solids will be very little, they can come out of suspension and solidify, and over time they may build up in the form of sludge. And if this sludge is allowed to enter the feed pump, it can lead to feed pump seizure due to small clearances in the sealing rings of the feed pump. And this can only happen over a long period of time. But it is something to watch out for, that some of this condensate, which can be condensate, some of this dissolved solids of your heating coil, etc., that can come out in the condensate, and then over a period of time it forms sludge. And then once it enters the feed pump, and since for the high pressure feed pump, the clearances are very, very fine. Since the clearances are very fine, the pump seizure can occur. And especially for the high pressure pumps, they are normally multi-stage pumps. And multi-stage pumps, and they have many impellers fitted on the same shaft, which is a pretty long shaft. And with these multi-stage pumps, you can have a bigger amount of problem with this with these particles which come, dissolved solids, etc., which come with the condensate. So it is essential that internal parts of the deaerator are examined and cleaned from time to time. And this becomes more pressing if the salinity content of your feed water is higher than normal. due to some reason your chloride in your feed water has gone up, your condenser has leaked, or something else has happened. As a result, the chloride in your feed water has gone up, and the chloride going up, even though the chloride may be below the recommended level, but still, as long as the chloride is up, that means the salt, it will start forming scales, etc. And then the scales, not only can it coat the inside of the boiler, it can also coat the inside of the deaerator, and then over a period of time, it can build up feed pump. The filters on the inlet side of the feed pump should also be examined periodically to ensure the filtering media has not deteriorated. Quite true that we should be checking for any and every filter in the engine room. So here also filters on the feed pump should be examined periodically. Any foreign matter should not be allowed to pass through. As we said, the clearances of these feed pumps, especially the high pressure feed pumps, the clearances are very fine. So you start getting foreign matter, that can lead to feed pump seizure. And feed pump bearings should also have the waterline filter to bearings examined and cleaned regularly. Okay, then we come to our next topic, which is economizers. No, the economizer which he's talking about over here is not the economizer that we think our exhaust gas boiler. Normally on our kinds of ships, the moment somebody says economizer, we always think exhaust gas boiler. But here the economizer which he's talking about is again for preheating the boiler water. Economizers are mechanical devices intended to reduce energy consumption and to perform useful functions such as preheating a fluid. The fluid in this case, again, it is your condensate. And the term economizer is used for other purposes as well, boiler, power plant, etc., etc. In simple terms, economizer is a heat exchanger. This is your simple economizer. Your feed water in, feed water out. Now the economizer working as a feed water preheater. That is only in case of a 3-stage boiler. Normally, on our kinds of ships, the economizer is only the exhaust gas boiler is only a single stage most of the time, unless we have a exhaust turbo generator, turbo alternator fitted. But most of the time, if we do not have a turbo alternator fitted, most of the time it is only a single stage, and we call it the exhaust gas boiler or the exhaust gas economizer, EGE. But here you have in this kind of economizer, this is basically the last stage of a 3-stage exhaust gas boiler. In the last stage where the exhaust gas has become the coolest, superheater, evaporator, then economizer. So the exhaust flue gases have become, the temperature of the flue gases have become the least. And then they pass over the economizer where the feed water is circulated, and from feed water out, here it goes. Normally in a 3-stage boiler, here it would go and enter the evaporator. And then the flue gas temperature there is higher, and there it becomes steam. And from the evaporator, it will go to the steam drum of your auxiliary or main boiler. So your economizer, the tubes, they are fitted with these gills or fins. Most of the time, while cleaning the exhaust gas boiler, you would have seen that the tubes, just to increase the surface area for heat transfer, the tubes are not plain, but they have these fins. The problem with these fins are, again, that any soot, which is if your combustion of the main engine is not good, any soot that is coming out of your main engine, that can get trapped in these fins. And if this improper combustion carries on for a long time, and the exhaust boiler cleaning and the cleaning by water washing or soot blowing has not been carried out for a long time, you could end up with an exhaust boiler fire. An exhaust boiler fire, even in the even in the best case, is never a good thing. And the exhaust boiler fire, how do you make out? You have your let's say, for example, this is just a single stage. So here it is coming directly outlet from the main engine turbocharger, and this one is going out to the funnel. Single stage exhaust gas boiler. You have your temperature probe over here that is giving you a temperature at inlet to the exhaust boiler, and temperature probe over here also, temperature at outlet to the exhaust gas boiler. And suddenly, if you find that this temperature probe is reading higher than this temperature probe, that means you have a problem. That means all the soot which is collected in these gills and fins, that soot has started burning. And then the first thing, of course, is to stop the main engine, because being a turbocharged engine, the engine has got some excess air which is pumped into the engine. So your flue gas will also contain some oxygen content, and that oxygen will help in keeping this fire going. So first thing we have to do is, of course, stop the main engine. Yeah, that's a completely different topic. Now let's go on to the next topic, which is condensers. Condensers, there are again many types of condensers. And your basic steam cycle consists of a boiler, turbine, and so instead of your turbine, we can have many other things. Boiler is there to produce the energy, and the energy is produced by burning fuel to heat feed water, which is converted into steam. And we require the steam to do work. Now the work could be energy of the steam is converted into kinetic energy in a turbine, or it could just be transfer of heat. We are using the steam for heating purposes. And what all heating purposes, you know very well. You're heating up of your cargo tanks on a tanker, on a crude oil carrier, heating up of fuel oil tanks, all the basic heating functions. And then once the steam has done the job which in the boiler, we need to condense it back to water. If there is any steam still remaining, last time we studied all the steam traps and etc. That steam traps, the primary purpose of a steam trap is to make sure that the steam has given off all its enthalpy, all its heat to the for the purpose for which it is for which the steam is produced. But in case of a turbine, the last stage of the turbine, from there also the steam which comes out, that is not yet turned into water. That is still remaining as steam itself, and that will come into the condenser, and that will be condensed. In turbine, the turbine again it's a multi-stage turbine. So as the heat of the steam, or as the enthalpy of the steam keeps dropping, the steam passes through various stages in a turbine. So you just like you have a multi-stage feed water pump, you also have a multi-stage turbine. And once the steam has become, it has lost most of its energy, then it comes out, it is still steam, it is not yet condensed, it has not yet become water, and that steam has to be condensed so that it can be handled. The steam cannot be put back into the boiler straight away. It has to be condensed into water so that it can be handled properly. Whatever additives we are required to put, we put all that, and then it is sent back to the boiler. So then it is for purpose, it is cooled down Normally with seawater, or if you have a HT-LT system, the LT will cool down the steam in the condenser. And then from the condenser, you have these extraction and feed pumps to return the condensed steam, that is return the condensate back to the boiler. And for a given set of inlet steam conditions, the efficiency can be improved by the use of feed heating. We just saw the deaerator come feed heater, and by using high vacuum in a condenser. We had talked about this, I think, in a few classes ago, why it is advantageous to have a high degree of vacuum in a condenser. Condenser reduces the back pressure against which the turbine works to an extremely low level. So if you have back pressure, if the turbine is working against a back pressure at the outlet of the turbine, if there is a back pressure, obviously the pressure drop across at the inlet of the pressure at the inlet of the turbine and at the outlet of the turbine, the difference should be as much as possible. But if we start having a back pressure at the outlet of the turbine, then the turbine, it will not function so efficiently. So if we, to create as little back pressure as possible at the outlet of the turbine, we have a vacuum. That means the condenser is actually working at vacuum. So in case the condenser is working at vacuum, even if the inlet steam pressure was at atmospheric, the certain extent. Why? Because you still have some pressure drop across the turbine due to the vacuum in the condenser. Now on the inlet side, you increase the energy which is derived from the steam due to this pressure drop due to the vacuum. Your turbine will start spinning that much faster. That means for the same amount of steam, the amount of energy which is produced by the turbine is much higher. So typically that vacuum is within 50 millimeters of mercury of absolute vacuum, and this increases the power output. The same inlet steam flow, your power output from the turbine will improve drastically. And obviously, since for the same input, you're having a higher power output, obviously your efficiency goes up. In thermodynamic terms, the condenser lowers the temperature at which heat is rejected from the cycle. And this increases the fundamental efficiency of the cycle. And this is not your, is what your, even an atmospheric condenser will look more or less the same. Construction wise, it will be more or less the same. Only thing, this ejector vacuum system, this won't be there. Otherwise, your water inlet, that is your seawater inlet or LT water inlet, cooling water inlet, that will be the same. Here they have depicted a 2-pass condenser. So water inlet, water outlet, your steam comes in here, condenses, and then it falls to this kind of sump at the bottom, and from there it is drained off to the hot well. The construction of this, it has got double flanges on both sides. You could have a single flange with a dome kind of end cover, but here they have put double flanges, one here and one there. These flanges, obviously, they have to have jointing which are absolutely gas tight, because otherwise, if you have air leaking in due to some reason, then the efficiency of the condenser and therefore the efficiency, including the turbine, the efficiency will drop. So the jointing here has to be absolutely gas tight. And then you have the regenerative condensers. Main steam turbine propulsion machinery. This is mainly for the main propulsion, again, is by steam turbines. In this arrangement, some of the tubes and enters the condensate sump as steam. So just like we saw the deaerator come feed water does so, and then the condensate is thus reheated to the same temperature as the steam. So the steam, the exhaust steam, which you see at the top coming over here, which is from the exhaust of the steam turbine, this exhaust steam that is entering these tubes through which cooling water is passing, which may be seawater, which may be fresh water, cooling water is passing, and then you have the central passage. And some of the steam, it bypasses the tubes and enters. So here you have a central passage, so it bypasses the tubes completely. That means it does not cool down. It bypasses the tube banks and comes to the bottom of the condenser. It enters the condensate sump as steam itself, not as water. The condensate is thus reheated to the same temperature as the steam. So here, as we were talking about in the deaerator, the entire idea is conservation of energy. We do not let the condensate cool down too much so that the boiler does not have to reheat it again to boiling temperature all over again. Reheating means you are burning fuel unnecessarily. So the fuel which is already burnt, that has already given its energy to the steam. Now the same steam is being used and reused to maintain the condensate temperature as close to your boiling point as possible, so that the boiler, there obviously there are few advantages here. Air and other vapors are not allowed to mix. So here again you have your air and vapor suction that is not allowed to mix with the condensate. And again, you do not have to spend more fuel to reheat this cold condensate back to steam again. The condensate is thus reheated to the same temperature as the steam, which increases the efficiency of the condenser. A central passage, here this is your central passage, enables some of the steam to pass to the sump where it condensates and heats this condensate which is over here. A baffle plate is arranged to direct, these are your baffle plates. Baffle plates is arranged to direct the gases and vapors towards the air ejector. Here again, like we had seen in the deaerator, here again you have a air and vapor extraction pipe. You may have a you may have a fan type of thing which draws out all the air, which is the air and other gases which could not be condensed. That is again drawn out here. So the purpose of this one is again the same as the deaerator. Many tubes are fitted between the tube plates at each end. The support plates of this part we cannot see because the tubes are going away from us. That means they are not this way. They are, the one end of the tube plate is towards us and the other one is away from us. So many tubes are fitted in between the tube plates at each end. Support plates for the tubes are arranged in between to prevent sagging. Obviously, if the condenser is very long, you would need to have some kind of support plates. Otherwise, the tubes will start sagging, especially if cooling water also inside them. Seawater or fresh water, two passes. The figure, it can be seen that the tubes are arranged in two large bundles. In the center of each bundle is an air collection duct, which runs the whole length of the condenser. And air is driven into these ducts by steam flowing rapidly in bundles. So you have the air collection duct, and air is driven into these ducts by at the left hand end of the condenser. These ducts are connected to a air removal duct. It's not left, it's left and right actually. So on both sides you have these air collection ducts, which are from which air is drawn out by a small fan. You don't powerful fan over here, because otherwise the exhaust steam will also get sucked out. So you need to have something which is not very powerful, but it still has to do the job of extracting all the air and other gases which could not be condensed. These ducts connect to an air removal duct after passing through the batch of tubes, which are screened from the steam in the condenser. So that is what the purpose of these baffle plates, to prevent steam from flowing out through this. If these baffle plates weren't there, you would have steam directly being extracted from these suction ducts. So just to prevent the steam from escaping from here, we have these baffle plates. So any steam which is here, it condenses and then it will fall to the sump, whereas the gases and air, that will get sucked out. By cooling the air, its volume is reduced, air ejectors are made more effective, and at both ends of each tube are located in a tube plate. That means these tubes, as we had seen in this is a more, what he's talking about, tube plate. So each tube is located in a tube plate or a tube sheet, as it is called in this diagram, usually made of rolled naval glass and bolted to each end of the condenser shell. So this could be bolted on, and then from now you will say, how can both ends be bolted on? So okay, this end is bolted on, then the tubes are inserted in these tube plates, and then they are expanded. You have the tube expanders, then the tubes are expanded in place. Once they are expanded in place, then these bolted tube sheets, they cannot be removed without removing the tubes also. Some more additional material on the regenerative condenser. As it expands through a turbine, as much as possible of the useful work is extracted from the steam by maintaining vacuum conditions in the condenser, that we have already talked about. If there is no vacuum in the condenser, if on the outlet side of the steam turbine we had a atmospheric condenser, the efficiency of the turbine would have dropped drastically, and then the amount of work which we are extracting from the steam, that also would have dropped drastically. For normal heating coils, etc., we don't need this, because on a heating coil, what was to be coming out from on the outlet side after the steam, there we do not expect steam. In a heating coil, we find steam coming out. That means the steam trap is not doing its job. Because in a steam turbine, it has to be steam that is coming out. It can't be condensed water that is coming out from the last stage of the turbine. And the size of the turbine keeps increasing. The first stage of the turbine is the smallest, and the last stage largest, because by then the pressure of the steam has reduced, the enthalpy of the steam has dropped. So then you require the larger surface area of the turbine blades that to transfer energy. So first stage of the turbine, if you see a turbine which is, if you normally see a propulsion kind of turbine, you'll find one end is quite small and the other end may be more than double its size. So the smaller size turbine blades are on the inlet side of the turbine, and the bigger ones, obviously, they're on the outlet side. The inlet side of the turbine, it is still in steam. And then on the outlet side, if you have a vacuum condenser, that means that steam is getting sucked out of the turbine by the vacuum in the condenser. So the efficiency of the turbine increases a lot. A lot more work is being extracted from the same amount of steam, and as a result, the efficiency greatly increases. Part of the function of the condenser is to condense the steam from the low pressure end of the turbine to as low a pressure as possible. Quite true. Effective operation of a condenser requires that seawater is colder than the saturation temperature. At atmospheric, let's say we consider the steam which is coming out, that is at atmospheric temperature, just for the sake of argument. Atmospheric temperature, the saturation temperature of steam, that is your boiling point, is 100 degrees centigrade. But follows that the seawater or the cooling water should be colder than 100 degrees centigrade for the condensation to be carried out properly. But it also means that undercooling will occur. We have to make the steam into a condensate, but in the process of turning the steam into a condensate, we find that undercooling occurs. Now, how do we take care of this undercooling? The same thing, by using the regenerative condenser, and after the regenerative condenser, we can also use that deaerator. Undercooling increases temperature range through which the condensate returning to the boiler must be raised again before it boils off. This is exactly what we talked about. So if the temperature range through which the condensate, after going back to the boiler, has to be raised again, that means we have to use that much more fuel again, which again is a waste of energy, and for the ship owner, that's a waste of money. To avoid this thermal loss, condensers are built with regenerative capacity, so that the steam which condensed is not undercooled greatly. It is condensed, but it is condensed to just below boiling the saturation temperature or the boiling point of the condensate at that particular pressure. And paths are arranged between and below the tube banks with direct flow of part of the steam to the lower part of the condenser. So the part of the steam flows directly to the lower part of the condenser where you have the condensate sump, and this steam heats up the condensate in the stump to pretty close to its boiling point. And in the process of heating, the steam which is doing the heating, that also condenses, and again that becomes condensate. And since the temperature is pretty high, close to boiling point, close to saturation temperature, any gases which are dissolved in the condensate, they go off from the condensate and they are extracted by the fan from the extraction duct. Steam then flows up between the tubes and meets the condensate from the main part of the exhaust, dripping from the tubes. The undercooled condensate falls, transfer occurs, resulting in negligible undercooling in the final condensate. The condensate dripping from the tubes may be below saturation temperature corresponding to vacuum by as much as 5 degrees centigrade initially. And deaeration performance of the condenser is also related to undercooling, in that the amount of gas, for example oxygen, that can remain in solution in a water droplet at below saturation temperature is dependent on the degree of undercooling. That means more the undercooling, the lesser the temperature below 100 degrees centigrade, the greater the chances of gases like oxygen, etc., being dissolved in the condensate. And then being dissolved means these gases will obviously go to the boiler, unless we have this kind of regenerative condensers or your deaerators. Deaerators also, they act as a feed water preheater. Theoretically, if a water droplet is at saturation temperature, then no gas will remain in solution in it. That's the theory. But if any gas is still remaining in the condensate after the regenerative condenser, then we have the deaerator after this, which will take care of any remaining gases as best possible. Another method of reducing the degree of undercooling when the seawater temperature is too low. That means if you are in cold conditions and seawater temperature is low, part of the seawater is recirculated again, so that the cooling temperature of the temperature of your cooling water is not too much low below saturation temperature, to enable the condenser to be worked at its design condition. That means too much of undercooling does not occur. So that is the whole idea of this recirculating. Yeah, this recirculating idea we also have for your main engine jacket water, main engine lube oil, etc., in very, very cold conditions. The part of the seawater is recirculated so that the jacket water is not undercooled, and similarly your lube oil also is not undercooled. The same theory works here. Okay, now we move on to the, if you have any topics on the, any questions on this? Well, we have a question and answer session on, I think, Friday afternoon. But as of now, if no question, then we'll go on to this thermal fluid heating. No questions? Okay, we move on. Some of you may have worked on ships where they have this thermal oil or thermal fluid heating systems. This system has got some advantages, some disadvantages. The advantage is that thermal oil can be heated up to a pretty high temperature without increasing its pressure. If you see this graph, this is your temperature graph, and here they have written the pressures. So thermal oil can be close to say 400 degrees centigrade, but the pressure will only need to be 20 bar. Whereas in your steam, firstly, steam will never come to this kind of temperature, and then the amount of pressurization which you would need to bring the steam to this temperature. For example, if you want to be somewhere in between 290 and 340, that is 50 degrees centigrade, say around 310, 315, the pressure would need to be about 100 bar. Because to have a 100 bar boiler and then all the associated piping and machinery and everything else in the engine room to be capable of handling the 100 bar pressure, you would require a very thick and heavy equipment and thick and heavy piping also. So steam has got its limitations, whereas your synthetic, your fluid, that can, now the fluids also, they are of various types. You have mineral fluids, pressurized, unpressurized, etc. The white mineral oil is, as you know, mineral oil is the base oil for any kind of lubricating oil, unless it is synthetic. The lube oil which we use on board is normally always mineral oil based, and the mineral oil, it is one of the byproducts of your crude oil. So the base oil which we use for, suddenly you find that the lube oil prices have shot up. That's because the base oil prices have really shot up. So this white mineral oil is the base oil, and to this we start adding additives to make it into lube oil. We add your dispersant, we add your detergent, and various other things depending on the purpose for which the oil will be used. But the the mineral oil is usually the base. The same kind of mineral oil is also used here for thermal oil, for thermal fluid heating. Both water and steam are used as heat carriers in process heating systems. But at temperatures above 100 degrees centigrade, water and steam require a correspondingly higher operating pressure. In our normal boilers at 10 bar pressure, your steam temperature would be anywhere around 150 to maybe 160 degrees centigrade. But for that, the pressure in the boiler has to be about 10 bar. The advantage of your thermal fluids heating system is that shipboard operation. For example, we go back to the graph. This is almost near 430, maybe 425 or so. The requirement for having heating fluid at 420 or 430 degrees centigrade on board our ships, that requirement is very limited, if at all. In the for industrial purposes, yes, there could be a whole lot of processes where where you require these kind of temperatures. But on board our ships, The maximum that we require is for your fuel oil to be heated up to 140 before injection to the main engine. The cargo never needs to be heated up to 140, 150 degrees centigrade. So that is the maximum temperature which you need. And for that, our normal steam does the job. But there are certain ships also where you have this thermal oil or thermal fluid heating systems, and at normal atmospheric pressureless, it can very easily give you close to 300 degrees centigrade heating. At temperatures above 100 degrees centigrade, water and steam require a correspondingly higher operating pressure, and these higher temperature levels above 100 degrees centigrade are often required to achieve the necessary heating requirements of the process or the system. And this higher temperature levels above 100 degrees centigrade, we just talked about the fuel oil before injection, prior injection, that needs to be heated up to 130, 140, 150, depending on what the manufacturer's recommendation and depending on the fuel oil which you bunkered, but very rarely above that. In the industry, you can have heating requirements which are way more than 150 degrees centigrade. When setting up heating systems using water and steam at these high temperatures, the systems and the components have to be designed for higher pressures with consequent strength requirements of special pressure vessels. So since as you can see here, we are already talking about 100 bar. At 20 bar, it has gone to almost 430. So here if we have 100 bar, and if the temperature requirement was here, say this is 320. Say around 20, we are already talking about 100 bar. And then the pressure vessels which you require, which will be very, very special. The components of that will be very special. The material that we to build these kind of special vessels, your point will start beginning. We cannot boil operating at 100 bar pressure. The pumps which are rated for 100 bar pressure, plus pipelines, gaskets, the whole thing becomes just impractical. And then the systems and the components have to be designed for higher pressure with consequent strength requirements for special pressure vessels. And then we have the resultant safety issues. Now, if you have something operating at 100 bar, come along with that. If your pipelines are transporting fluid or steam at 100 bar, and at those temperatures, the smallest will get their safety will get compromised. They could get injured. Larger, greater wall thicknesses, greater weights, and safety at the lower. As a result, the safety considerations which come from operating steam itself at say 300 degrees centigrade, then we are talking about 100 bar. Then the like some point other beam heat for the synthetic fluid, which is absolutely pressureless. 1 bar plus over here, and the pressure is it's practically zero. So the safety considerations, the piping thickness, the pumps, etc. This is hardly anything. And as a result, the whole entire system will be that much lighter, and it will not pose that many safety concerns for the personnel who are operating it. In thermal oil heating, the operating temperatures are much higher than water or steam circulating systems. Obviously, we have just seen that. Thermal oil boiler units and systems must be designed for operating with special thermal fluid developed for high temperature application. Your normal lubricating oil, we just talked about that your normal lubricating oil has got a base oil, which is mineral oil. But that same, the lube oil, it cannot be taken up to 300 degrees centigrade. What will happen to the lube oil? It will start cracking up. It will start carbonizing. So that means this thermal oil, it has got these special additives so that the base oil is designed. I mean, the base oil with the operator, with the additives, and with with mainly the additives, it is basically made for high temperature application. Our lube oil is not made for high temperature application. For example, the lube oil cannot function at 300 degrees centigrade. And since oil is being used, it should be borne in mind that it is potentially flammable and dangerous if not dealt with properly. Okay. I just said that lube oil is not meant for operating at very high temperatures. Case in point would be cylinder oil or your generator crankcase oil. The generator crankcase oil is doing double duty. It is also working as your cylinder oil. And main engine, of course, you have your separate cylinder oil. Cylinder oils, they have the additives so that they can work, they can provide lubrication to the piston ring and the main engine liner or the generator liner at temperatures well above 300 degrees centigrade because of the special additives which they have. Your normal, say, main engine crankcase oil will not be able to do the job. When I was talking about lube oil cracking up, that would be something like main engine crankcase oil. Crankcase oil is not designed for operating at these high temperatures, whereas cylinder oil is. And the same is the case with the thermal oil. The base for all these oils could well be the same base oil, which are added in these oils. Their characteristics change completely. So here you, like cylinder oil can operate at temperatures well above 300. Here also you have thermal oils which are operating at 300 plus degrees centigrade. Since oil is being used, it should be borne in mind that it is potentially flammable and dangerous if not dealt with properly. This is mineral onto, say, the generator exhaust, and if it is spraying finely onto the any hot surface, it can catch fire. Similarly, especially some fluids as a heat carrier instead of water or steam. So here he's talking about thermal oil boilers, but the thermal oil can also be heated using electric heaters as required. Always thermal fluid is used as the heat carrier instead of water or steam, and this thermal fluid, also called heat transfer fluid, operates at atmospheric at atmospheric pressure all the way up to above 300 degrees centigrade. So you see a difference with steam. We have already seen that in the graph. It operates to well above 300 degrees centigrade, white mineral oil pressureless, above 300 degrees centigrade. At the same 300 degrees centigrade, you require steam or water to be at 100 bar. So these are the other advantages. Comparison, corresponding steam or water pressure above 80 at about 300 degrees centigrade. So you can imagine if you have a system working at 85 bar, what are the components, piping, pumps, etc. that would be, and the boiler that would be required to deal with this kind of pressure. It would be just too heavy to have on board. At temperatures higher than 320 to 340 degrees centigrade, the thermal fluid must also be pressurized, but moderate amount of overpressurization above atmospheric is required as compared to water or steam, which would require 150 to 170 bar. Now we are just to from 300 to 340. We are looking at 150 to 170 bar for steam, whereas for thermal fluid. Basically, thermal fluid works like any other heating fluid. It is heated and cooled while being pumped. Consumers and heaters in a closed circuit, just like systems. Whereas water heaters and steam boilers can be heated using an internal pool of water, just like we have a galley hot water heater. Thermal fluid must only be heated by forced circulation. That means the fluid has to be kept flowing through the place where it is being heated, which could either be an oil-fired boiler being passed over electric heaters. We will come across those diagrams later. So this flow, obviously it will not flow by itself. It has to be kept flowing by pumps, and the pumps, they have to ensure at all times that the